Well, greetings and welcome back. This thing got a hold of me recently while I was reminiscing with my son about my early years. And well, what got to me was that it seemed that most people, and I mean everybody I encountered, teachers, coaches, cousins, aunts, uncles, friends, most took to me in some form, and I became aware of it. Yet, what was a bit baffling was that I didn't quite seem to understand it. Perhaps most people are nice, and they will talk to you if I do the same. Our neighborhood was very nice too. We grew up just 3 blocks from the beach here in Long Island Sound in West Haven, Connecticut. It was easy to make friends with both kids our age and parents also. And back in 1965, one of my friends decided that we should send a letter about our teacher, who was a wonderful man. So on a cold night in January, we started our letter and we finished it a day or two later and sent it off to the show Wonderama on Channel 5 Metro Media serving New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. We had our hopes, but both of us figured, we'll see what happens. Maybe we'll get lucky. Well, a few weeks later, they called us, that being my mother and myself, since I was not feeling well and didn't go to school that day. I don't recall, but I think that I answered first, and then they informed me that we would have to come down to Manhattan and be on TV, and the show would be on a Sunday morning in mid March. We were thrilled, though in reality it was a very long day as we were the last act. Sonny Fox seemed tired since the filming and cuts were time consuming, and we were growing tired too, which included all of us, Jimmy, myself, her mother, his mother, and my mother. We survived it, and when I saw the show on TV, it didn't do much for me since we looked very tired, but we were still proud of what we accomplished. And a year later, I went out for midget football since I was a big football fan. And after the tryouts, my mother said that I hope you make one of the teams, but don't be discouraged if you don't. Well, a couple of nights later, the coach called and told my mother that I was selected for the team and that I would be a co-captain of the team. And she was very surprised and very proud. And this was the first season of the league in 1966. We would lose the championship to Kelly Lumber, which featured me intercepting a pass in the late fourth quarter at about the 5 yard line. And I ran 95 yards for a touchdown, but somehow it was called back for a so-called clip. It didn't end there. When it was in the paper the next day, it claimed that Colin Davidson had intercepted the pass, and his number was 24, mine was 29. And at that distance, 24 could be seen as 29. And as my mother said, I got screwed 3 different ways that day. For all I did on the play was never recognized, and the supposed clip was never verified. Oh well, such is life. Next up was Mr. DiMatteo at the seventh grade dance at the last day of the first half of the year for the holidays. He was a very nice man, and at the dance, he was one of the chaperones. And we went back to school the next day, or whenever it was, since I remembered talking about the dance, and he was pointed out for a few people. And when he mentioned me, I was surprised. He said that I danced the night away. And he was just being nice since I was not a good dancer, and the girls always dance better than the boys. And where we lived, we had to walk to each of the 3 schools, elementary, middle school, and high school. And those winters back in the 1960s and 70s were brutal at times, but it toughened us up, so we got used to it. And then there was the time that me and Tommy DeMedios decided to take our desk and put them over our heads. And we're sitting in our chairs, and the substitute teacher quietly comes in and says, "Please put the desks down on the floor where they belong." And we did just that, and everyone got a kick out of it. Well, at least the students did. And fast forward to my first class at Central Connecticut State College, which is now a university. And I think it was a search course in humanities because at that time, only 3 colleges in the country employed them, and they were not transferable. So the professor was Norman Asbridge from London, and yes, that's in the United Kingdom, and he was a kick in the ass if there ever was one. So on the first class, he selects a vivacious blonde for a skit that some guy would be a part of, and of course, it would be me. Now, I know that I should have been thrilled to be selected in the sketch, but I wasn't. I'm not very good at acting, and she was total opposite of me. She was attractive, not shy. She put on an excellent show because she was very confident, at ease, and very, having fun with the role. Well, to wrap up this story, this was my very first class at Central Connecticut State College back in 1972. And she was so good, and I was, how do you put it, weak and a bit nervous. And Norman Asbridge was quite impressed by the show, and he did tell me in front of the class that I needed some work. And to boot, to show you the type of person he was, he said in a British accent, if you want to learn about life, go to a pub. I say true to that. Now I learned that pretty quickly since my father was a beer distributor, he occasionally would let me and my brother drink a little beer or occasionally take a bit of a shot or a scotch or whatever. And I actually wanted to see Norman in a pub on our campus, but never found him in any of the local spots. Now I could say that woman who played the part with me really liked me. Yeah, right. But she was quite good. And next up is a story of this guy who was a year or two older than us at Central Connecticut. And he wrote a biweekly paper on the goings on at the campus. And again, I'm not making this up, but one of his columns mentioned that Mr. Hollywood was seen again coming out of Beecher Hall in his black leather coat. And I don't recall what else he said, but when I thought of it, I said, I have a black leather coat and I was residing at Beecher Hall. So was it me? But I'll never know anymore and about this. And Mr. Hollywood didn't quite fit the profile, especially moving forward as I was drinking and starting to smoke pot and starting to take on the Animal House look. And when I finished my years at Central Connecticut, I found work at Amtrak and finally finished my psychology requirements to graduate. And I finished them closer to home at Southern Connecticut State College. Once again, it was an interesting class. I seem to remember that it was 11 women and I was the only man in class. Our task was to visit a class of people that were institutionalized for various maladies, and I chose an older man who was quite an interesting person. He loved painting and was quite good at it, and his work reminded me of the much of the Japanese painting. And he did tell me that that's what he focused on. He did inform me that he was an alcoholic for several years in his life, and he was very open and didn't hide anything. While our job was to spend time with our assigned person, I sincerely enjoyed being with him. At our final class, the professor took me aside and said that at first I didn't think much of you. You were quiet most of the time. And then she said, which I was surprised at, that I wrote the best synopsis of my patient and that she was very impressed by my observations of him in the final paper. And that overall, despite being out of school for 2 years, I was very sensitive and my perspective on him was quite touching. And lastly, I was quite surprised too. And then there was a guy in our dorm at Central Connecticut. And when I first met him, it didn't click with me. And then when I thought of it, I went to talk to him since I realized that he was the guy I hooked up with while we were in the midst of a bench clearing brawl on the last game I played in high school as the game ended. It started with a few of the linemen, and what tends to happen in these situations is you pair off and hold each other, to stay out of trouble. Fortunately, neither of us wanted to get involved. And what got me was that he was black with crystal blue eyes, and I do recall his first name, which was Eric, but not his last name. But as we got closer to the gym, it started up again, and the police used tear gas to separate the people as we all had to go in the same door as we played the game at home. Unfortunately, neither of us got involved, and it was the last game of the year. But what a surprise it was when I saw him at the dorm at college in my freshman year. And the year before, we played Stanford High late in the season, and I had a better year in my junior year than I did in my senior year. Stanford High was one of the best teams in the state, and I had to cover Bobby Augustine, who was quite a good athlete and about my size and weight. And he made all state. And I recall playing against him, and we would chat after the game, after the plays, and he was a good guy. It was an interesting game, and I challenged him all the way. And overall, I thought we played a pretty tight game. And once again, he was in our dorm for a year or so, and I think he transferred to Southern Connecticut, I think. And he did say that he remembered that day and that we had a good battle going. He was also a very good baseball player and a good hitter. And then lastly, there was Christine Nicholas, who worked with me at Cablevision, who had an incredible sense of humor and was extremely bright. Long story short, she got a job with Discovery Channel, and on her last day with us, we both left with tears, and we stayed in touch for a few years as our offices weren't that far apart. and we would occasionally meet for lunch and, or just call and chat. Well, I was not aware that something was wrong with her, and she had major surgery and did not come out of the coma. And she passed away. And to think that one of her coworkers called me up to tell me that she had passed away, and both her and myself were in tears again. I just couldn't believe that that she was this ill. And I attended her wake, which was tough, and it took me a long time to get over it. She was one of the funniest people I ever met, and so unpredictable. And she always said that we got along so well since our birthdays were 2 days apart, though she was 15 years younger than me. And one time while we were crossing a street on Madison Avenue, she was walking with a friend, and I'm going in the opposite direction. And she stops me in the middle of the street and she introduces her friend to me. And we were quiet enemies in the comic department, so to speak. So I reminded her not to ever touch me again. And she smiles at me and says, Slappy, I love you. And yes, she always called me Slappy. And I suppose that I could still add more of these kind of interactions, but I think this is enough for me. And I certainly had enough for anyone who was turned into this. And I'm out.